This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Welcome to the AID Family Council meeting, and we have some wonderful guests with us here tonight. Jim, I don't know if do you want to do the introductions of our subject for this evening?
Sure. So remember, everybody, welcome again. Remember that we had sort of set up four platforms of ideas that we wanted this family council to look at in terms of education. One had to do just with general awareness of, political issues and things like that. One has to do with providing advice to the agency. And this one tonight is on support. So we're just forming as a group. And so we thought it was a good idea to have folks who have worked with lots of individuals and families and groups from the Arc of Illinois to come and talk to us. So Shirley and Megan, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? And again, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. By the way, if you all are not members of the ARC, you should be. Join, you get all the action alerts and lots of webinars and stuff like that. So a plug for the ARC. Okay, now over to you.
Well, I appreciate that. That's a great lead in. My name is Shirley Perez. I am the program director for the Arc of Illinois' Liggis Family Advocate Program and the Family Support Network, both programs of the Arc of Illinois. But more importantly, I am the parent of an individual who just happens to live with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and she lives at home in the community with me. And so I live and work to educate and inform families because at the end of the day, we're all fighting the same issue. So with that being said, I'd like to have Megan introduce herself and then we can begin our presentation.
Hi, I'm Megan Muty. I'm the Senior Ligas Family Advocate. I cover most of Central and Southern Illinois. And then I have a partner, Ruth Aguilar, who covers Northern Illinois. So we're thrilled to be here tonight. Lori has always been incredibly generous with her time in doing presentations with the ARC, and the many times we have asked her. So we're thrilled to be able to do this tonight. So thank you for having us.
All righty. Thank you, Megan. And with that, we'll get started. And right off the bat, before we get into this presentation in detail, here's what I'd like to ask you, family members. Here's a question I want to pose to you now. As a parent of an individual who is living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, whether they're living in a provider, being served by a provider agency, or being served by you at home, what is your greatest fear regarding your loved one with a disability as you age? So I want you to think about that question, and at the end of our presentation, I'd like to have some conversation about it, okay? The three things that we really want to touch on, we want to talk about the kinds of supports that parents of adults with intellectual and developmental disability needs. Some of those needs are obvious, but some of those needs are hidden. So we want to kind of talk about that. We want to talk about how these needs change as parents age. And how can parents support each other in groups or councils like this? What can we do? Because I am always just in awe when I think about my daughter is 44 years old, and I've been doing this for a minute. And a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things stay the same. And so one of the things that I was fortunate early on, and the reason I started doing this work is because I had the privilege to learn about Katie Snow, who was a parent who had two children, one with disabilities, and she was a public policy graduate. So some of the material that we will discuss is things that I learned from her. So with that being said, we're going to start with our presentation. And remember, the question is, what is your greatest fear regarding your loved one with a disability as you age? Next slide, please, Megan. So the Arc of Illinois has 7 programs. And as Jim said, if you're not a member of the Arc of Illinois, it would really be beneficial to you if you became a member. On our PowerPoint, which you will have a copy of, it lists the various programs as well as a link to those programs. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about all of them, but the Liggis Family Advocate Program and the Family Support Network, those are the 2 programs that I am the program director of, and Megan and I both work on. We do have a family to family health information center that works with individuals from 0 to 21, any type of medical issues. And this might be not for you, but it might be for someone that you know that you can share. We have the Illinois Lifespan. We get tons of calls at our Lifespan because we share information. We get calls from people in other states. What do I need to know if I'm moving to Illinois? We get calls about recreational. How can we find a provider that supports a person who is deaf? So it's truly an awesome resource, and it's updated. We have our Family Transition Project. That is a program for individuals who are living in a state-operated developmental center who want to live into the community. So we have a program that works with that. We have a consumer stipend program. That program, James talked about education. Well, we understand that education, sometimes it costs. So we have a consumer stipend program that is funded by the Council on Illinois Developmental Disabilities. And that stipend allows parents to be able to participate or attend conferences without having to pay. And then, of course, our training and advocacy, which is so important because communication, as we all found out during this pandemic that we're still in, that effective and timely communication is critical. And so you can feel free to visit our website at www.thearcofil.org and learn more. Next slide, please. So, of course, the Liggis Family Advocate Program. Many of you may be familiar with it. It is a program that is funded by the Illinois Department of Human Services for the purposes of working with individuals who've been selected from ponds to receive services. And we work with those individuals to make sure that they are aware of all of their options, including ICFDDs, intermediate care facilities for persons with developmental and intellectual disabilities. So we work with them, and there's contact information about that. And it's important that you understand that because every pond selection since 2012 has been a result of the Liggis consent decree. And you can feel free to go to our website and learn more about the Liggis consent decree. And so that's why we want to make sure that when you hear the term Liggis Family Advocate Program, it was founded as a result of the consent decree. Next slide, please. Family Support Network. This is key as to what we're going to talk about tonight. The mission of the Family Support Network is to unify, to bring together people like you and I who have individuals with disabilities and their families to advocate for funding, services, community resources that strengthens and supports the individual while empowering them to live in their own home until they're ready to move into a residential setting. So that support doesn't stop when you move into a residential facility. For example, I get calls from individuals during the pandemic when they had questions about, oh, I brought my son or daughter home, and are we going to lose our spot? What is going on? I get a lot of calls from families as we're beginning to go back into the providers, whether it's community day services or, just questions about services. And one of the things that we're very fortunate to do at the Arc of Illinois, we partner with our providers, and we partner with our independent service coordination agencies, because our ISCs are our gateway to services, and our providers, we need each other. We need providers, and the providers need us. And we want to make sure that they understand what the issues are, what the concerns are, and more importantly, when people like us bring a concern to our provider, we're not coming to tear them down. We're coming to communicate, to be respected, to determine how we can work together. Because at the end of the day, as much as you and I would love to be able to care for our son or daughter, it's just not possible. But we want to make sure that we take advantage of every option, every opportunity to educate our providers and ourselves. Next slide, please. So, what are some of the reasons why you would reach out to the ARC of Illinois? As I stated, there are 7 different programs, and I gave you a little brief overview. But to generalize, if you're seeking information and resources about system navigation, it could be, you might say, well, I'm already in a provider. So why do I need to know about additional resources and system navigation? Well, just like your life change, the life and the needs of the individuals that the provider serves changes as well. New processes and new policies are updated. You need to know about those policies. Like, for example, a very big one, individuals living in, sellers, group homes, effective July 1st, if those individuals are working, they can maintain their income. So those are things that, you want to stay on top of. When we had the stimulus that came out, you need to understand the pros and cons and all of the things that you need to know. If you're interested in training and advocacy opportunities, because there's power in numbers. If an individual was recently selected from the PONS list, questions about services available in the developmental disability waiver programs. If you run into barriers in getting needed services and supports, and referrals to other agencies, supports, and information. So that's just generally some of the things that you might want to reach out to the ARC of Illinois about. But more importantly, for this session, Jim talked about advocacy, knowing how to connect, knowing who your legislators are. We have a public policy committee, and we're actually getting ready. I'm a member of that public policy committee, and we actually have a meeting scheduled with Representative Danny Davis on tomorrow, because we want to talk about SSI reform. We need to get his support as part of, President Biden's, attempt to improve SSI. That has not been updated in years. So those are the type of things that, we talk about. What can we do? What type of legislation do we hear? When Jim talks about being a member, when you're a member of the ARC, you can submit ideas and priorities that we may consider as a group, that will be our priorities for legislation, moving into this coming year. So just some ideas of why you would want to reach out to the ARC. Next slide, please. So, high quality family support programs. Again, remember I said earlier that some of the information that we're sharing in here, when you see Katie Snow or Snow K, it is ideas that she brought and things that she's been, talking about for years, but it's something that we continually have to work on, because for some reason, I'm yet to be able to define, why is it that we always have to keep fighting to get the policymakers and the decision makers to understand the value that families bring? It seems that we're the only group of people that we continually have to validate our value when it comes to the individuals whom we love. So when we're talking about high quality family support programs, we want to make sure that we educate our providers and our policymakers that high quality family support programs should be family driven. The family should lead the decision-making process concerning the types and the amount of supports that they receive, not just some legislators or people that come together and just throw something out there who has no idea about what it's really like when you're trying to meet the needs of the individuals that we all love. It needs to be easy to use. So many times when we're working with families in the Liggis Family Advocate Program, individuals who've been selected from ponds, they're so overwhelmed by the paperwork, the red tape, all of the things that need to happen. And we understand that the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare oversees the policymakers of the division, and you have healthcare and family services, and your ISCs have to abide by the policies and the providers. But we want to educate these policymakers to let them know that we need to streamline this process. Families have been trying and fighting to do everything that we can do to ensure that our loved ones are safe and healthy and get the supports that they need. I actually had a family member tell me some years ago, when I had worked with them, loved one had transitioned out of a state operated developmental center, and we were finally able to get them in a provider. And she actually said, now I can die in peace because I believe that my child is well taken care of and I have things set up. And the reality is, whether you want to talk about it or not, we're not going to be here forever. And sometimes I still get overwhelmed when I think about that. And I've been doing this for years. And that's the reason why I asked that question. What is your greatest fear regarding your loved one? If you're having issues and it's difficult for you to navigate now and you're here with your child, what are the thoughts when you're not here? But more importantly, what can we do? How can you get involved so that we can help make this system easier, so that it's not so overwhelming, so that it can be flexible and families can choose the supports and the services based on the individual's need and preferences, and not have to wait 100 years to get these supports, but to be able to communicate it, to have some input and some say into what we do and how we move forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who is going to talk about those things that I said up front. What kind of supports do families need? How do these needs change? How can parents support each other? And how can you support the provider that is serving your loved one? Because here's something I want you to really think about. If the provider that is supporting your son or daughter is someone that your son or daughter is happy with, and you are too, you want to think about how can you make sure that while you're here, that you can support that provider so that they don't go out of business, so that they're not, you don't have that worry. Because one of the things I know for my daughter is consistency and being able to be in an environment where she has developed relationships, because when we're no longer here, they're going to have to deal with the loss of us. But if they have that relationship and that provider agency has, some consistency, and we don't have to worry about them folding, that's one less thing that we'll have to worry about. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share those, and let's lead into Miss Megan. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. I appreciate y'all having us here tonight, and you're letting me talk about a topic that I absolutely love. So when Jem sent me some exploratory questions that examined kind of what you all were looking for, we decided to kind of take all of them. And Shirley had some great last minute ideas that we added. So I hope it speaks to what your needs are. But I love that you all are working through what your role is going to be and what your group is going to look like and how you want to engage. So I wanted to talk about sort of the two dual roles that we see often with families. And this is carried over because we see this often in the healthcare world and slowly carrying over to the DD world. And I think it has great potential, and you all are in a position to impact it. So that's kind of two dual roles. There's the family to family support role, which it sounds like your group may do some of, and then there's the family engagement and quality and design in providing kind of background support to AID, who's caring for your adult loved ones. So within that family support role, what we see a lot with parent groups is mentoring, parent matching program, providing education like this, sometimes respite supports, social gatherings, sibling supports, things like that. In the family engagement and quality or quality improvement, what we see is, and we love to see, is families and self-advocates participating in leadership roles within developmental disability organizations, participating in advocacy efforts at all levels, whether it's within your organization or it's at the state level or the federal level, within your small community, really ramping up engagement in that. And as Shirley said, you know, there's a lot more power behind 10 or 15 voices than one or two, and you all are starting to move towards that, it sounds like. Participating in hiring processes at organizations. So being able to participate in the hiring of, let's say, DSPs or upper level administrative staff, that can be an important role that families can play. Program and policy evaluation. So what we often saw in healthcare was families being able to review educational materials and make sure they were family centered, self-advocates being able to review and give feedback and guidance on that, or participating as educators of staff. One of the most powerful roles you can have as family members is educating staff about your experience, because that is what helps open eyes about what living this experience really is like. And so finding opportunities in partnership with your organization to share from a family perspective or a self-advocate perspective what your experiences have been like. So knowing that you're sort of straddling two different roles, you know, you're straddling this role of family support along with advocacy and what that's going to look like for your group. We're kind of covering the gamut of ways you might use that. And one thing to look at is, what do high quality family support programs have in them? One is to focus on the entire family. So it's very easy, especially in developmental disability work, to focus on the parent. That's always our focus. But what we forget in that is the role of other core people that really impact the life of an individual with DD. So that may be grandparents, it's very often siblings. And so a high quality support program is going to look more globally at family. The other thing that is important to remember is that the person with an intellectual disability defines their own family. So family may not be even who they were raised with. You know, if you ask an adult, who do you identify as family members, they should be able to do that, and that should be part of a support program. Changing as the family's needs and roles change, and as you said, Jim, in your questions, kind of how do things change over time with age, and all of you know that as time goes on, we worry about different things. So I have a 21-year-old daughter, Annie, with intellectual disabilities, and I certainly am worrying about much different things today than I did 10 years ago, and I imagine in 10 years, my perspective is going to change greatly. So it's sort of evolving over time, and what do families need or want from you? Encouraging families to express their own needs and decide what they want in that program. Sounds like you all have done that. Treating people with disabilities and their families with dignity, respecting individual choices and preferences. And that is sort of a hallmark of what families advocate for within the DD system. So advocating for that within a specific group or a specific program can be a critical piece of making sure that individuals have the ability to make the choices that they want to make for their own life. Respect of cultural, economic, social, and spiritual differences. Encouraging families to use natural community resources. So anytime I'm talking with a family, you know, most of what I do during the day is talking with families who are newly selected from the PUNS list and are getting supports, or at least are about to get supports. Those supports, I kind of consider these concrete, built-in structural supports. But even if you max out those supports and you do everything you can to get everything you can out of those, which you should, you still won't have enough support for your loved one. And I think you all know that. And so the only way to really build the kind of support network that you're going to need long term is to use natural community supports in partnership with those kind of concrete structural supports that come with waiver services. And that's something we can talk more about. Ensuring that the supports that you have either as a group or that your program has are easy to find and easy to use. And, you know, Shirley and I have actually been talking. I'll give you a great example. We're getting a lot of calls from families who are reaching out to organizations, not AID, but reaching out to organizations that are critical to their process of getting services, and they're not getting answers. They're not getting, they can't leave voicemails. They're not getting calls back if they are able to leave voicemails. And you can imagine the frustration to say, hey, these services are available to you, but you cannot get a hold of anybody to talk to them. And that's sort of just a really easy core barrier that families run into all the time. And that's something that families can impact. And then making sure that families, regardless of where they live, have equal access to participate in groups like this, but also to participate in advocacy or access DD services. So sometimes families will say, well, what would that look like? You know, we have a family group more local to me that's kind of in the development stage, not quite as far as long as you are, but one of the things they looked at is, well, how could we help other families? And most groups aren't going to be able to do everything on this list, right? This is a pretty robust list, but picking and choosing some of these things can make a difference for the families that you all work with, or bringing them into your group. This might be some things they seek out. Information referral, so that parent-to-parent support where you can say, here's some supports and services that I've used that have worked well. Here's some barriers I've run into or some difficulties. Both recommending and guiding as families are learning the system. Service coordination, I can see that being a possibility with a really well-developed large parent group. I think that's a lot to ask of a parent group, but assisting with some guidance around service coordination. Temporary relief or respite, and I would combine that with day or child care for families who have younger children so that they can participate in group work. Financial assistance, things like we do at the ARC with the Consumer Stipend Fund, just providing small kind of emergency funding, things like that make a big difference to families. Providing information on future financial planning. When we talk about, you know, Shirley mentioned what's your biggest concern. One of the concerns we hear about from families the most consistently is worried about long-term financial planning, both having enough kind of economic stability for their loved one after they're gone, and also not running into barriers or essentially making mistakes in their financial planning that negatively impact their loved one after they're gone. And I'm sure that's something that's on all of your minds, certainly on my mind, but that providing education around that can be very helpful and take away some worries. Mutual support groups, kind of what you're doing now, and then some groups actually help with housing modifications so that the houses are more accessible to individuals. So I'm sort of thinking through how could you assess your group in development, depending on what your goals were. And some questions that I think might be useful are, how are you included in programmatic decision-making at an organization? So are you included broadly in programmatic decision-making? And maybe it's not the whole group. Maybe it's individuals sitting on committees. Maybe it's, like I said, on a hiring committee. Maybe you're deciding on specific curriculum. You know, you have a say in that. Those are things to look at. Are you included in quality improvement work? So if your organization has quality improvement team, having both self-advocates and parents sit permanently on that team is very, very important in terms of providing family-centered supports. Can services be easily adjusted and changed for families if the needs of a loved one changed or if family needs changed? Now, I will say Shirley and I work a lot with families who may want to change kind of mid-waiver. They're getting home-based and they just want to switch to group SILA, or they're getting host home and they want to switch back to home-based. And all of that is doable and things that we can talk to you about, kind of a very concrete thing we can talk to you about if you have an interest in. But any provider, regardless of what kind of supports they provide, we want to make sure that they have some ability to adjust kind of on a dime for small changes in needs, and that families feel comfortable sharing what those needs are. Sometimes families and self-advocates participate in leadership groups, sit on boards, things like that. I know that at your organization that happens. Asking parents, does participating in this parent program or this parent group help you navigate the system more easily? That can be helpful. And is there a program for family-to-family support? So an official program where families can reach out to other families, especially just as they're joining the organization, can be really helpful. So I know that the group has an interest in advocacy, and I think this is a great list. I won't read through all of them, but a great list of getting started in advocacy and things to remember. The one at the end I would point out the most, be patient. The advocacy process, specifically legislative advocacy, is a long road and can be frustrating and difficult, but it's so worth it. And you can make a huge dent in system barriers if you're willing to kind of jump into that. And if you want to do that, reach out to us at the ARC, because we can do some trainings on that. We can help you kind of know the basics of legislative advocacy and provide some educational materials. And thinking through all of these as you move through. And when I talk about advocacy, I'm not necessarily just talking about legislative advocacy. It might be advocacy within your organization to provide a new service or support. It might be advocacy at the community level to get respite support in place that you may not have now, or a transportation program in place so that individuals with disabilities can get around the community more easily. There's a lot of different ways you could use those advocacy muscles, but thinking through what your priorities are the first step. So at the ARC, obviously it's an organization that bites off a large chunk of advocacy every year and has kind of an advocacy priority list and goes at it that way. That may be something that you all want to look at if you want to jump into doing more advocacy within the community or within your organization. This is where you can find information about the ARC advocacy program. And what you'll find on there is our 2020 priorities, and the 2021 priorities will come out in the fall of this year. But that may be interesting to you if you're somebody who wants to get more involved in advocacy. So one question that Jim asked is, could we share some common stressors that parents report in parenting an adult with intellectual disabilities? And certainly there is a significant difference, as you all know, in parenting an adult with IDD than parenting a child with IDD. And some of the things we hear from families as they get older are certainly in line with some of the work that Kathy Snow has done over the years. And that would be financial strain, particularly as families come into retirement and they maybe don't have the same income stream that they've had before, that the strain of, especially the extras of parenting an adult with IDD can be difficult. Marital stress, and a lot of that is on agreeing on goals and what it's going to look like for families to parent late in life. Managing concerns around long-term decision making. Are we going to leave, a certain area after we retire? Is it more important that an individual be in a familiar environment where they've been for many years, or is it more important for them to be with family? Do you follow a sibling? There's so many things that go around long-term decision making and trying to figure that out, and there's a lot of different perspectives to consider. Isolation due to parenting demands. Now that is one I will say that I don't know that changes greatly over time. Certainly families of young children share with us deep isolation they feel in not being able to be a part of community because the demands of parenting, if their child has high support needs. And though the demands of that day-to-day parenting shift as you have an adult who is hopefully getting appropriate supports, that isolation carries often for families over time. Fragmented services in a complicated system. The system is extremely complicated. I can't, tell you this round more than any other round. I've had families calling me saying, I don't know if I want supports because this seems like too much for me. I don't know if I can take this on. And I think that's a pretty natural response to a system that has a lot of different players and a lot of moving parts, and they break a lot, and they don't always talk to each other, and families have to talk to each piece of that. And that really can just be overwhelming. So for a family who is either already overtaxed or is managing quite well without supports, taking that on is difficult, but what you balance in that is some of the long-term safety net that you'll lose without services. And so that's a tough spot for families to be in. And the other thing that older parents sometimes share is that they feel more excluded from decision making. So if there's a service provider involved or a DD program involved, and when a child is young, a parent's participating in all those decisions. But once a service provider gets involved and a self-advocate wants to engage more in their own choices, parents can feel a little excluded from decision making, and that can be a tough adjustment. So some of the things that we know make a difference for families across time is expanding the circle of support and looking at that natural support system. That is things like your church, your neighbors, support groups, supports that go outside of that traditional DD system. Gathering more informal and formal connections and recognizing that those are going to evolve over time. So you're not necessarily going to have the same support groups and same connections within DD providers and families that you had when your child was young, but those do evolve over time. And I hope that's what you're seeing now with the group that you're in, that you're making those connections and building new friendships that see you through those adult years. Desire or necessity to step back from being a primary caregiver, which is actually the goal that most families have as they get older, that they do want to step back from that primary caregiving role, but they still want to participate in decision making. Many families at this point feel like they need additional support and education to continue advocating for the needs, partly because they're learning about their child as an adult, but also because the system shifts so significantly, even over the course of 5 years. You may know the system quite well 5 years ago, and it's a completely different system now than it even was 5 years ago. So families often feel as they get older, they have to put more time into learning system changes. Sibling and extended family engagement might shift, and that could shift either way. You can see siblings step into more of a caregiving role, or extended family do the same, or you see the opposite. You see siblings who decide that they want to disengage a little bit. They're not as comfortable taking on that role, or maybe they move further away, or extended family support that you might have had falls away due to illness or moves or things like that. And that can be very, very difficult. And really setting up and understanding what an adult sibling wants and needs can be useful as you move into this, because you want to make sure that everybody is kind of coming at it from a similar perspective. And families often aren't comfortable having those difficult conversations around how involved do you want to be, and you really have to sit down and have to make some time for those so that you can make sure that nobody feels burdened by responsibilities that they didn't anticipate having. And then a lot of parents, as they get older, increase their engagement in broader advocacy. And I suspect that's true of some of you, really wanting to participate in more legislative advocacy or community advocacy, because maybe some of that primary caretaking role has been taken off their plate because services and supports are in place. And so they're more able to participate in system-wide advocacy, and that becomes a really meaningful thing as they get older. I do always like to put a shout out to the Sibling Leadership Network. So if you have older siblings, adult siblings who would like some support or would like some mentorship to partner with other adult siblings of individuals with intellectual disabilities, it's worth taking a look at that because it's a really fabulous program. So this, without a doubt, is outside of Shirley and I's wheelhouse, but nonetheless, we at least want to mention when we talk about what families worry about and what some of their concerns are and how can you address those concerns, they often are these, focused on these topics: future planning, guardianship, shared decision-making, or alternatives to guardianship, special needs trust, ABLE accounts, and services and support transitions for loved ones with IDD. So I made that one blue with stars because that is one Shirley and I can help with. That if you have service and support transitions or concerns, you're not getting the support you need, or you want to know what that's going to look like if it changes over time, we absolutely can help you with that. But we encourage you, if you're losing sleep over any of those topics, future planning is a huge thing to bite off, and a lot of families avoid it because it's so overwhelming, but getting in there and sort of picking away at it can make a huge difference in anxiety around some of these topics. So I would encourage you to look at the Special Needs Alliance. That is an alliance of attorneys who are specially trained in future planning for individuals with disabilities. And then the ARC of the United States has a really fabulous future planning website and tools built in there where you can actually save information over time. So those are both things that I would encourage all families to spend a little bit of time with, but particularly those who are having concerns or questions around those above topics. We did want to put a little bit of a plug in for some upcoming events that we have that might be useful to you. We have a home-based boot camp for families. It's targeted at families who are relatively new to the home-based system under the Medicaid home and community-based waiver, and they really want to learn what that is all about, who's involved in that, what their responsibilities would be. There'll be a family panel, a personal support worker panel, and we think it's just going to be a great way to do a deeper dive into what home-based looks like for families and to kind of demystify that a little bit. We do Liggis Know Your Options events every month. It's a quick hour where we give an introduction to the Medicaid home and community-based waiver and other options available in Illinois for adults with intellectual disabilities. And that's an easy thing to register for each month. And there's generally a pretty good Q&A session. The healthcare coverage and options event is often very interesting to all families, something to look into. And then Illinois Lifespan is doing a person-centered planning event that may be useful. And it would be great for those people interested in advocacy. And I mentioned before, because Jim had said something about having a real interest in advocacy priorities as a group, this is what our advocacy priorities are. Some of them may line up with what your group advocacy priorities are, some may not, but it may be worth looking at. But again, it is dated by a year and it'll be updated this fall. I wanted to point out, because I love the Consumer Stipend Fund, and you hear Shirley and I saying, you know, hey, consider going to trainings. That's a big part of the advocacy and getting engaged in advocacy. And this Consumer Stipend Fund is open to all Illinois residents, people with disabilities, family members, guardians, foster parents, and it provides a significant amount of funding to go to pay for a hotel, pay for registration, meals, personal attendance, really things that make a big difference in families being able to attend. And now that we're hoping we're going to get back to in-person, I cannot tell you I love in-person trainings, and to not be able to see your faces right now as I do this, I just hate it. So we're going to get back to in-person training soon. I hope to see some of you in person. And if you have an interest in that and you want to come to some trainings, I would really check out the Consumer Stipend Fund, because it's a very easy way and there's no income requirements. Anybody can utilize it. And we will send this to you through Lori or Jem so that you'll have the link to put in an application for that if you're interested. And lastly, we can open it up to Q&A, but this is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. We won't always know the answer, but we will certainly give it our best shot, and we will make sure you're referred to people who can give you accurate information if we're not able to. And we work with families across the lifespan. Shirley does a lot of very deep dive work with the Family Support Network, and we're happy to help you with any issues that you run into. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have questions or concerns. And with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing. And let's see.
And Megan, let me thank you for that awesome presentation. And I just have to say hi to Mary. I see her here. She's been at many of our ARC events. And how's your daughter? I just wanted to say hi to you. And so I hope that some of what we have shared has been helpful to you. And to get back before we get into any Q&A, the question that I asked, based on some of the things that you've heard, what is your greatest fear regarding your loved one with a disability as you age? Now, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone would like to share, I would just be interested to know. You know, not to put anybody on the spot, but just if anyone would want to share with us, what keeps you up at night as you continue to age?
And Jim, I don't know if you can tell me if people are able to chime in or not. Are you able to tell?
Yeah, everybody can open up your mic and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
I'll go.
Yes.
I'll go. Our greatest fear is that Maria has a seizure disorder. And so in looking for a place and people to care for her other than ourselves, the greatest fear is that she's injured or even, even smother herself or something during the night without having proper observation and care. So that's my biggest fear. So
Thank you so much.
Oh, go ahead, Shirley.
I thank you so much for sharing that, Mary. And the reason why I posed that question, and I'm so glad that you were able to pop back in, Lori, is because not only do I want it to be a question, but we want these issues that you have, we want that to be a part of your counsel. We want that to be a part of your education, so that when you're meeting with your providers, you can say, here, hey, here are some concerns that we have. Have you thought about it? How would you address that? So thank you so much, Mary, for sharing that. And Megan?
So Mary, on one thing what kind of services is your daughter in now? Can I ask?
We have the home-based services.
Okay.
And so we have, we're hiring our own caregivers with those funds, and it takes place in our home. Bob and I still live here. So, it's pretty well supervised.
Right. I understand. I think that you share a concern, though, that most families also share. It's certainly a concern I share, thinking of how do we make it work so that she can live independently, but I'm not scared every night that she's going to get burned on the toaster or something, the door's not going to get locked. So I appreciate you sharing that. I have some hope, I will say, as a parent, that with the remote supports and some of the technology that's coming out, that we're going to have a few less worries around that, or we're going to have a little bit more support, creative supports that we don't have now.
I can't tell you the number of times I've left my own door unlocked, so.
Me too. And burn myself on the toaster.
Right? So these are things that are part of living a life, right? Some of that is how we deal with that as parents, right? And how we let our children grow up and go somewhere else, and that's hard too, right?
Yeah, that may be the most important thing that is said this entire time. It's just a part of living, right? You're right. Thank you for saying that.
And you know what, Lori, that is an excellent point, because pointing out as parents, and I speak personally, I was so busy trying to break my daughter's fall. She never knew the floor was hard until one day my husband said, you know what, if she don't hit that floor, she's not going to know that it's hard. So what you just said about some of the things and the fears that we have, not maligning them in any way, Mary, but they're not any different than any of the rest of the people. And so when we can kind of relax and kind of get into flow and understand that, then we can work on how we can, work to alleviate that so that it's less of a concern. But thank you for bringing that up, Lori. That's an excellent point.
Sue, I see your mic open. What's your biggest fear?
In the interest of full disclosure, Jim and I have a son together. We are divorced, and he is remarried. So there are a couple of things, and actually, we recently did some path planning with him, and this came up. We're in a very different situation in terms of we're having some interfamily relationship along with David's siblings that has become challenging, and not in the way you'd think. You would worry that they might not be concerned, and they're kind of overly concerned, and so we're trying to get this sorted out at the same time that we're trying to work on things for David. But I think one of my big concerns right now, and I hear it being alluded to, is that we as a family are trying to figure out what is good for David, what is best for him, and how to get those things. And I know it's a challenge. I know there's a financial, I know there's a staffing challenge. I know all of that. There's also a time element that says, oh yes, down the road this might happen. And I'm like, okay, well, will I be here? And will I, all of those things. It's like everybody has in terms of the future. Is he going to have the best future possible? But am I going to be able to help set that up? And my son is nonverbal, so it's really difficult sometimes to tell what he wants. And I'm struggling right now to be realistic with what his future, you know, can be or will be, or I want to push for things for him, but he's got to like them too. And oh, it's everything. Housing is accommodations are another. That's the big time frame thing. Oh, we're hearing great things, but it's like, but when and how soon? And the concern with him getting older, and the older our loved ones get, the harder it is for them to make changes as well. So all of those things roll together.
I can
Wow.
appreciate though what you said about that, what your vision of what he might need or want maybe doesn't align, or he doesn't enjoy necessarily what you might think he would enjoy or what you want him to enjoy. And I can't tell you the number of families, certainly our own family, where I have a vision of what it's going to look like, and then I can't make it work because that's not in line with what her vision is, whether she tells me that verbally or otherwise. So
Right.
you shared that because I think that's very common.
Yeah.
I also think you hit on something that Megan talked about, some of the stressors, and that's one of the stressors. But she also talked about expanding your circle, because
Mhm.
one of the things that I'm doing with my daughter, because she has a seizure disorder as well, and I realize that she's getting older, I'm getting younger. Okay, yeah, right. I have to have a little joke in there for myself. But what I have learned is that I have to expand my circle. I have to get her nieces and nephews more involved so that they know about her. I have to have a written plan so that they understand the things that I'm working on, so
Mhm.
that if something suddenly happened, then there's a plan, and that, this circle has been expanded and they are aware of her. Okay, how could I expect, if I have a daughter who's nonverbal, who has a seizure disorder, and she lives with autism, all of a sudden something happens to me, and I expect a first cousin who's never had any interaction with her to be
Mhm.
able to come in and to step in? No, you've got to expand that circle and let them see the good, bad, and the ugly. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you brought out an issue, but you also, there is a solution that we can work on, and one of those is expanding those circles, because we are not going to be here forever. So
Right.
thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that. Really appreciate it.
Can I jump in real quick, Jem, and soon ask what you all thought about the PATH project or the PATH process? It's okay if you don't want to share that, but is that something you guys have talked about as a group, the PATH process?
We have not as a whole group. That might be a topic for a future presentation. Megan, why don't you give us the 30-second lowdown on what path planning is?
Oh, now you should have told me that, Jem. That's a tough one for me. But essentially, path planning brings together a large, like Shirley just said, kind of expands your support network. It isn't necessarily about like my friends. It would be about anybody that might have connections that would be useful to my daughter. So bringing them all together and building a plan, both short and long-term plan. It's actually a very visual plan often.
Yes.
And really seeing how different people could connect to provide some supports to allow parents as primary caregivers to take a step back and look at the perspective from a broader array of people who might want to engage and be a part of my daughter's life, and help her reach some goals that are really unique to her. And my experience with the path planning with families has been families tend to really, really like it. And it tends to be very meaningful to them. But there's not a lot of path facilitators, so we don't see path happening as much as we'd like to. But is that helpful, Jim? Does that sort of speak to
Yeah,
your?
and you know what Sue and I did was we're really using it as a springboard now to taking a second look at the discovery tool in the and then leading us into the person-centered planning. So those of you who have services know that every year you meet with your ISC to reestablish the person-centered plan for your loved one. And so we had really sort of, I wouldn't say rushed into the decision 6 years ago when our son exited school, but both his mother and I were working full time, and now we're both retired. And we're like, now's the time when we've got lots of energy to sort of take a deeper look at what we really want for David's future. Like Sue said, David is nonverbal and can't communicate his own needs and interests. So I think my biggest fear is that when we are no longer able to advocate for him, that David is not in a good place. So that's what we're really working on now. And we took path planning as sort of the springboard for that. So, yeah, really helpful. Anybody else on what your greatest fear is? That lead question that Shirley kicked us off with.
I want to say something. When you talked about expanding the circle, and I'm going to point fingers there at Barb, because her son and my son are do a lot of the special rec activities together, and they do Special Olympics, and I have found it invaluable to be talking to the other moms. And we have recently been having discussions sitting on the softball bleachers, talking about, hey, what about this? What about that? What are the possibilities? Different things like that. And if nothing else, it's just an amazing support to know that other people are wrestling with the same questions. We're all in different places, and our kids are in different places with different abilities, but we are able to be talking about it. And it has been an incredible relief to me and support, even if we don't decide the same thing. But that's part of expanding that circle. I know that we support each other, but also just bouncing the ideas off and that sort of thing. So that's been invaluable. Sorry, Barb.
Anybody else who wants to share? Otherwise, I'm going to turn the discussion a little bit, but I don't want to do that before anyone else who wants to share around Shirley's question there about what your great fear is. Lori, I thought there was some really interesting stuff for how this group could interface with AID as an agency that Megan shared with us in particular. And Megan, I'm wondering if it would be easy for you to pull back up the PowerPoint and find that slide about, I think it was questions for your family council or something like that.
Mhm.
I thought there were some really good things in there, Lori, that might be worth our discussing and thinking about as we go forward.
Page
And
10, Megan. Page 10.
Yeah, I actually popped in here to check that everything was going all right when that was on the screen
Awesome.
earlier.
Yes. That is that's the slide. And Lori, I just think there's some really interesting issues for us to think about here. Is going forward is how does this group work with leadership at AID in terms of programmatic decision making, in terms of serving on quality improvement committees at the agency. Are there ways for members of this group to increasingly participate in leadership roles within the organization as a whole? So I just thought there were some really interesting questions for us as a group to think about on this slide. Anybody else struck by any of those questions or thoughts?
I would say that's what most of this is what I thought this group was working towards. So hopefully we're on the path. And I'm also hopeful, you know, to have our new vice president of innovation, or our chief innovation officer, joining us in August, because I think you know, some pieces will be able to be helpful there, because there just is not enough time in the day to do all the things that we wish to do. And so looking to broaden our circles too, to be able to make sure that we are incorporating and continuing to listen to people, be person-centered. I mean, if you look at our strategic plan, you know, right now it's all about, you know, becoming more person-centered, you know, trying to, you know, go from good to better, right? Making changes that are positive. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to work together towards these things, because I go back to that question that was just here before, and the thing that keeps me up at night is trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the people that we serve across 7 counties and across 600 employees, and you know, across a lot of responsibilities, and you know, with a desire to do better and better with the people that we support. So I think of us all as a mutually beneficial group, right?
Maybe, Megan, can you give us any specific examples, you know, about how family councils or parent groups have been involved in helping agencies make decisions? You know, in serving on hiring committees, I was really intrigued by that idea from a different slide. For participating in leadership, Megan and Shirley, what are some of the things that you've seen in other organizations with other family and parent councils?
Sure. So an easy one, like you said, Jim, is hiring groups, because sitting on a hiring committee is a great opportunity for parents to push the message to new staff or potential new staff about how family-centered that particular organization is. So that's an easy place to start. Another really easy place to start that I've seen be very successful is families reviewing teaching materials or curriculum around things being family-centered and accessible in a way that is meaningful to families and self-advocates. So that's also a very kind of low-hanging fruit. If you want to get families involved initially and you're not sure how to do it, that's a pretty easy one. And then you kind of move up. So as families become involved in leadership committees, or families do education with staff, that, you know, the investment is higher at that level. To me, one of the most impactful ways that families are involved in other organizations that I've seen is families as teachers. And so really building that into staff support, that, you know, a couple times a year, a family group comes in and talks about their experience navigating the developmental disability system, talks about their challenges, their fears, as Shirley said, and really helps make that experience real for new staff members in particular. And in that way, families can be teachers to staff members who are just part of orientation. You know, it's just a regular thing that families talk about their experiences, because the reality is, as all of us know, unless you really, really know the DD system or you're a family member, you really don't know how difficult it is to navigate. And so, you know, humanizing that a bit for new employees or people newer to that organization can be useful.
That's great. We're in our strategic plan is improving our training and our leadership development. So I think that's a great idea to improve our training for new hires and for ongoing folks, and also for our leadership development group that is working on how to support new, not new and old supervisors, just because it's, you know, it's a hard job, and also trying to you know, reflect the diversity of our workforce within our leadership. So I think that really helps would be great ideas for that.
Yeah, I
And
think
if
that's
I could
a
just,
great idea.
if I can just add to that, another reason, and I'll give you a perfect example. When you have a strong council, a strong family group, like you're building, Jim and Lori, and your interest in advocacy, the additional $170 million that we just got added to the DD budget as a result of the Guidehouse study was a direct result of advocacy. So when you have a strong advocacy group, and let's say you need to go to, right now we're working on SSI reform, and you need someone from your group to go talk to the legislators. They don't want to hear from the CEO. They want to hear from the families, the people who is directly impacted. And when you work on that, and remember, as I said when we started off, we need each other. We as family members who have individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we need providers for services. And as providers, you need individuals to provide services too. So when we get that mutual respect for each other and work in that regard, where you can, Lori, you can call up and say, okay, Jim, he's my go-to parent when it comes to talking about SSI. Or Linda is my go-to person when it comes to talking about a caregiver. That is dynamic, not only for the family, but also for the organization. And that's how you get your message out there.
And I do think
that's right.
the curve on this one, Jim and Lori. You know, we don't get asked to talk about this a lot because there's not a lot of really strong family groups running. And I think, you know, this is an indicator that AID is already doing significant work in this area.
And you can take that slide down if you want, Megan. I just thought there were some good ideas there that it was worth our reminding ourselves of. So
I just wanted to add something. As a parent, and I have the luxury of being retired, I feel a challenge with my son being in ASILA of trying to figure out how much to do without being invasive, but being a real part of things, and just trying to strike that balance. And I see here the opportunity for some things that allow me to be involved in the organization to do for my son and for everyone else. I'm not sure how else to explain it. I say it's frankly, as a parent, I'm probably not letting go per se the way I should, but it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough thing as a mom. It's a tough thing to say, okay, just go ahead and do whatever, and so I appreciate these opportunities, being presented this way to say, yeah, actually, we do need your help to do some of these things. So this is something that I'm going to be mulling over and, talking about and figuring out where my niche is that I can help out.
Good. That's great. Good.
All right.
Anybody else have a comment or an insight or a reflection or something that struck you in particular from this presentation and our discussion tonight? Anything else that you want to add or ask Shirley and Megan before we break here? Well, again, let me encourage you, if you are not a member of the ARC, send off your check today. It's not a huge amount to become a member. And fabulous conferences that the ARC throws every year, and just lots of resources on their webinars and website. So the premier advocacy organization for our folks. So Lori, anything you want to add as we wrap up, other than to thank Shirley and Megan for your expertise? And my guess is that sometime in the future, we're going to have you back to drill deeper into some of these topics.
We love that.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everybody for continuing to participate. Get the word out to other family members and parents who would like to join the group. We have this set schedule on this this is the third Thursday, right? Is it the third or the fourth Thursday? Third.
No,
Third Thursday, I think, of the month, always at 7 p.m. And it's always the same link. So you can always forward your link if you have it, or have them contact us. There's a place on the website in order to get information. Thanks so much. Appreciate everyone, and particularly appreciate Shirley and Megan sharing their time with us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And one last
Thank
word
you so
I'd
much.
like to say on behalf of the Arc of Illinois, we thank you. Lori, we appreciate you. You have always been out there presenting with us. But I want to say to each one of you, family members, I want to say to you, Lori, as the provider, work together to build the organization that you want. And as hard as it is, it's not about us. It is about the individual who is living with the disability, and we want to do everything we can, even when it's hard. And remember, we need each other, okay? So have
Shirley,
an
I feel like,
awesome,
we ought
awesome
to
day.
pass the collection plate after that. That was like a great 1 minute homily right there. So,
Amen.
Well, you guys are wonderful, and it has truly been a pleasure. We love sharing information, and we appreciate the opportunity that you guys provided. And we're here to support you in any way that we can. And I just love Megan working with me at the Arc of Illinois, and every opportunity that I get to say that, I say it. It's awesome to have good support.
yeah, that's true. Sue and I actually met via Zoom with Megan back in the spring for a kind of hour counseling session about options and opportunities. So this is for real, folks. Take advantage of it. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you to our presenters.